prologues and epilogues then fit in. So you have, for R&J, you have like the whole story in a prologue almost, and then things, like As You Like It, or something, where there's things that are extra on the plot line. So it's kind of like set up and knocked down all in a short moment, and then go. So just wondering how.
Well, there's two things. One is you have to examine where and how those prologues and epilogues came to be. Later in his career, some of those epilogues were purposely put in for special performances and stuck. Like the epilogue in As You Like It, for instance, there's evidence to believe that it was sort of a part of a royal performance and stuck. So then you have to decide if you keep it, and most of us do, how then can you work backwards to make sure that we have the energy to hear all that? Because by then the whole story's done. You're like, really? You're gonna go on some more? Really? So you have to figure that out. Same is true. I mean, the prologue to Romeo and Juliet actually isn't in the folio. So you're gonna go, well. And 2 times ago, I begged and begged and begged, and I said, let's not have the prologue. We're just going to go right in. We're going to go right in. And for about 5 minutes, we entertained it. Because it was just too radical. Right? It was just too radical what to do about that. So I'm sort of sad because of this whole notion of sort of telling the story. But, then there's a reason for it, perhaps. I mean, was it to sort of get everybody sort of used to hearing almost all of these plays? Well, by the time we're getting to this one, it's not unusual to have sort of an opening scene with like 2 people just sort of getting our ear used to it. So when you mess with the beginnings of these plays, you say, oh, I'm going to start to play blah, 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 or I'm going to get rid of those 2 guys talking in Winter's Tale. What the hell are they talking about? Who are they? They're Bohemia. Like, what? These names, I can't, fine, just get to it, There's 2 consequences for that. Well, there's 3. One is plot, because it's kind of nice to hear these names. Even though you're like, it's nice to hear it, right? So just orally. And the second thing is getting used to the opera singing that we're about to hear, right? And you don't have to. And if you're in a production you feel confident about, you're like, well, I'm not going to get anxious about the fact that I don't really know what they're talking about. They seem to know what they're talking about. This is good, so I'm feeling confident that they'll make it all make sense to me. But meanwhile, I can just let it kind of wash over me, right? The third consequence, certainly for Winter's Tale, is then you're asking Leontes to really ratchet it up even faster. Yes? Yes.
And there's also there's something about the quality of language, and sometimes this early, like the quality of that Bohemia exchange is very decadent, and it sets up a kind of decadent world.
To go against.
Yeah.
Right, to come back to.
It's almost like Alphonse and Gaston,
correct.
Your place is better.
That's great. That's brilliant, because it's also about when we actually go to Bohemia, what was our assumption of that? Right? Yeah, so if you take that piece of information away, then we in audience and we on stage have to work hard to make sure we somehow build it in. And then sometimes you build it in an arbitrary way. Because you need we need the information somewhere. Someone's like, hey, cram that in there right here. Well, it was already there, lined out, linear, right? So it's a great question about it. So you have to kind of assess. And then, ultimately you say, oh, play's too long, I'm going to lop those 2 things off, and we're just going to move on, and this is going to be the way it is. You know what I mean?
Does any of it have to do with whether they were indoor or outdoor plays, too? Whether they're Globe or Blackfriars? How much you have to focus people's attention at the beginning of the play? Is this a Globe play, do we know, or?
It's too early for Blackfriars.
It's too early for Blackfriars. It was 1606-ish or something like 1603 or something like that, right? Yeah, right. It's a great question. It's also something I think you need to just sort of wrestle with. And not just necessarily just to have the answer, but to say, does it matter to me or not? You know what I mean? Does the answer matter? Does it matter that the 5-act structure was based on blah, 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 blah? Don't know. Does it matter that it was about attention? Maybe, but in what sense? I think the issue of attention is always crucial for us in these plays. These first 10 minutes, 20 minutes are unbelievably crucial. Because people are either going to be willing to go on this thing or they're not going to be willing to go on this thing, right? So lining up all those things, because it's a hard language to hear and understand and grasp, and there's all these funny names, and, you know, who knows what we don't know the story. So we have lots of challenges as practitioners to make sure we set this story up, right? So the issue of my sense is that he had more challenges getting attention because it was outdoors, and even if it were indoors, my guess is there still were challenges about how to get attention, because we assume lights were on all, there were candles on all the time. It wasn't until, you know, the 19th century that all of a sudden Wagner says, you know what, I want you all paying attention to my thing. I do not care what's going on in your life. I want you to look this way. So I'm taking the lights away from you, and of course, you look where the light is. This is why, you know, directors are always saying to lighting designers, looks pretty but can't see. Put some light up there, right? Because you can't hear if you can't see.
And in our outdoor theater too, at the beginning of the play, unless they change, I mean, obviously there's 8 and 8:30, but at one point I think there was even an 8:45 start time, and so it's harder to get attention if it's still kind of light out and there's sounds from the park and all that stuff.
Yeah, I know, it's all that, right, so you've got to figure out how to kind of take advantage of epilogue in a way, just kind of like, and how much you engage with us. I mean, my sense is much more engagement than we really sort of conventionally allow, even though we kind of do a little bit more now, especially outdoors, but there's much more audience engagement. It's kind of like, nothing shapes you up faster than some actor come talking to you. You're like, oh, I better wake up, pay attention. You know what I'm saying? So, and it also reinforces my sense of how these plays work. And I think we talked about this a little bit last week too, which is that they're not complete. They're just blueprints. They're not complete. What's complete is them in performance with an audience. That it needs that extra element to fill in what it is and how it's going to be received. All we are in charge of is what it is. And so it has no answer. The answer comes in the doing of it and in the shared doing of it with an audience. And what that they used to, for me, beautiful sort of gesture and convention from 100 years ago is to actually literally engage it and make them be a part of it. We don't often do. We've gotten more used to being passive, haven't we? 95% of our entertainment, 95% of our theatrical entertainment is passive, right? Theater, television is passive, movies is passive, YouTube is passive, right? But theater is not passive. It shouldn't be. But we come in all trained, right? It'd be an interesting study to sort of talk about the rise of the first movie generation, which would be my parents' generation, right? And how audiences began to behave in the 20th century, and with the advent of lights and stuff like that. And now that we're busting up models again, we're kind of going back to sort of an original gesture of inclusion. Meaning you have to participate for this to make sense. I actually don't have all the answers. I need you to reflect and respond back to me, to show me that it makes sense. And this sort of two-wayness, I think, is what's built into these plays, and I think that's why we continue to respond to them for lots of other reasons, but it's about this sort of exchange of sort of the emotional arcs of the plays. And I think that you know, there's a lot of things we have to kind of fight in terms of our own conventions, you know, that we're used to having, that actually are antithetical to sort of embracing all that could be in here as well. So whatever it's worth.